Hi, this is Shambhavi. Welcome to my weekly podcast about spirituality, love, death, devotion, and waking up while living in a messy world. The Satsang with Shambhavi podcast is recorded live each week with students of our nonprofit community, Jaya Kula. For more information and to find out about attending a satsang, visit jayakula.org. Thanks for listening. Much love to you, wherever and however you are.
Could you talk about how to correctly apply the idea of female and male principles as embodied by Shiva and Shakti?
There is a fundamental quality of a pulse in life of separation and reuniting. This Shiva Shakti thing only applies to manifest life. It doesn't apply to the ultimate. There's a wonderful line from Laleshwari, the 14th century Kashmiri poet, where she says, at the end, meaning once you have realized enough, there's only something on a road. There's no Shiva Shakti, she says. So just remember that this relates to our manifest experience and an experience of separation and coming back together again. This is the reason why this has been encoded as male and female. And then, of course, in the traditions of India, the Hindu traditions of India, there's many other combinations. So there's not just male and female, but first of all, those are considered to be a part of everyone. Our external way that we show up is one thing, but male and female aspects are in all of us. And there's many deities that embody this, and there's many rishis and mahasiddhas who were born one thing in one life and another thing in another life. So it's not really black and white. The other thing is the creative principle and the principle of feeling awareness. These qualities are principles of the base state, that there's something alive and creative here, and there's something aware, and there's something feelingful. And those things are also gendered when we're telling a story about manifest life that mimics what we see in our ordinary lives, that people who have female bodies give birth. So that's the creatrix principle, and then there's this feeling awareness base state that's without that creative impulse is inert, just awareness. All of these things are related to our lives as we experience them. Our feeling of separation and of coming back together again. And then our experience of creating life and our experience of feeling full awareness. Those things are the writ large version of our ordinary experience. Of course, Abhinavagupta, the founder of this tradition, tried to, and he did pretty much succeed in naming something that holds all of this but is not bound by this. And he called that Paramashiva, or Para, and he used those interchangeably. Parab, or Bhairava, and Bhairavi. He didn't really have a one gender in which he was talking about the whole. So I'm not saying that the tradition is like somehow gender enlightened. It's not. It was also a patriarchal tradition in many ways. But these things are a lot more fluid in the tradition than we think when we just hear about Shiva and Shakti. And again, remembering that that really applies to our experience in everyday life, not to the base state of all of reality, not to the totally unconditioned, is totally unconditioned by everything, including gender. And as I said, Abhinavagupta tried to indicate that by having like a 37th tattva, this overarching thing that was holding the whole thing and couldn't be contained by our ordinary concepts. Actually, there's in the neo-tantra communities, and also in communities that don't consider themselves to be tantric at all, there's things about embodying the divine feminine and the divine masculine, right? And they have ideas about what that's supposed to look like. But actually in this tradition, it said that men have to discover that they are Shakti, and women have to discover that they are Shiva on one level, because we have to discover that we're the whole thing. That's as much as I can really say, and not stray into pointlessness.
You know the like images of the Shiva Shakti union sex ones, and Shakti's always tiny. Is that just sexism, or is there any symbolic?
Yes.
Like...
So yes, it is just sexism. And it relates to something that I've noticed about almost every spiritual tradition I've known about, which is that they become more conservative over time. As they get further away from the initial opening that created those traditions, the initial communication between wisdom and somebody who was going to be around on this planet to tell us about it. It gets more and more impacted by cultural norms and dogma. Almost every tradition gets more conservative over time. And my puja teacher pointed out that those images of Shiva and Shakti in some kind of embrace, that the Shakti got smaller over time. It started out, if you look at the older images, she's not smaller. But so that's a very good question. That the iconography also tracks this conservatism that creeps in. And now, of course, we have a situation where most of the people credited with teaching in this tradition are actually teaching something that is a medley or an amalgam of more mainstream Vedanta or Advaita Vedanta and this. Of course, they don't get billed that way. Everyone's in a direct line from Abhinavagupta. But in point of fact, most of them are teaching something that's much more amalgamated. And this didn't start in contemporary times. I mean, this conservatization did not start in the 20th or the 19th century. It started way back when.
Is that tendency towards conservatism just because that's like samsara?
Well, I think when things are around for a long time, first of all, they tend to get more acceptable, and the way that they do that is becoming more like normative culture. For instance, when Dzogchen first started, it was way on the outs and considered extremely radical. And proponents of Dzogchen or teachers were run out of town, and some of them were even killed. They were heretics, basically. And the Bon tradition, which is part of what Dzogchen partakes of, and sort of part of Bon, but it's also got other influences happening, was also considered extremely heretical until the Dalai Lama started talking about it differently. And so what's happened now is that when it went from a heretical householder tradition, very shamanistic, Bon was very shamanistic, to now monks are saying that they're Dzogchenpas and teaching Dzogchen. You know, people following all these precepts and rules. Just like Trika did, it's getting mixed with other more normative styles of practice from Tibet. There's people that are saying they're teaching Dzogchen that are teaching something so really very, very different from what my teacher was teaching. He was still insisting on the householder aspect of this tradition, and he was also considered to be, you know, he got a lot of criticism from people that were trying to normalize Dzogchen. It was a big feature in his life. He brought it up at every retreat. It obviously had bothered him that he was always being criticized and argued with for what he was doing. And as far as I'm concerned, he was preserving the tradition in a much more original and radical form. So it just happens because the people that are practicing want to have more cultural capital and cultural power and economic power. This is what happened in Trika in Kashmir. The tradition became more and more an upper crusty affair, something more and more practiced by upper crusty, well-educated men who were in a certain milieu, who wanted to preserve their cultural Brahminical power. And they did this by doing something which has been called Vedanta by day, Tantric by night. They deliberately, I don't know how deliberate it was, but this was happening in Abhinavagupta's time. This is not new. They were trying to consolidate their power at a time when the Brahmin caste was coming under criticism and also under economic pressure from the merchant classes. and they were consolidating their power this way, and they were using, in a sense, using the secrecy, the widely announced secrecy of this tradition to make themselves seem more powerful at the same time that they really didn't want to step on too many people's toes. So the tradition started losing its more radical aspects even from that time, and that has just continued. I mean, now people are teaching things that I wouldn't even recognize as Trika. We're calling it that because it still has a cachet. People go around saying, well, it's the highest tradition from India. Just like they say about Dzogchen, the highest tradition. I mean, if you're actually following the tradition, you cannot have that attitude. There's no such thing as a highest tradition. It's like this bid for some sort of supremacy, I think, or economic power, cultural cachet. And it happens in just so many different traditions. It happened in the Catholic Church in so many ways, but one of the ways was that at some point, I don't know when this happened, but they forbade anyone to do divination. No lay person was any longer allowed to do divination, and it became only like specialized people in the Vatican who were allowed to do it. That was just a power grab, right? They didn't say it didn't work. They knew it worked, so they didn't want anyone to have access to it but the people they had control over. And this just happens when institutions become more important than the traditions and the practices, when charismatic figures and leaders become more important than practitioners. This just happens. It's human. That's what we do. I've been criticized too. I mean, not widely, but there's people out there who say they're practicing in some related tradition to this, maybe not this exact one, who have criticized me because I'm always going on about how the tradition is. And there's something like anachronistic about that.
I've got a question about what is meanness. I was thinking about it a bit in terms of Titan realm, the feeling of wanting to like outsource that pain and put it on somebody else. But then there's also the feeling of just like wanting to be superior to somebody. And I was trying to feel into like, is there always meanness in Titan realm?
I think Titan realm, God realm, and Hell realm are the loci, the realms of mean. Right? But they're all mean with very different flavors. I think Hell realm is more, I am actually going to lash out at you with intent to harm. It doesn't really have anything to do with feeling superior. It's like, I want to make you feel low and ashamed and terrible about yourself. And I'm not claiming I'm superior. I'm just going to make you feel horrible. Yeah, it's much more like, take the knife and stick it in your heart. And I don't care what you think of me, but Titan realm is much more like, I am better than you. I don't actually know how good I am. That's my problem. But I know that I'll feel more good if I make you feel less good. Titan realm is a specific, and human realm too, like, you don't measure up. You don't know enough, you don't do it well enough, you're dumb, you're whatever, finding like specific points of making you feel smaller, less competent, that kind of thing. It's inherently mean. I mean, meanness just means one thing. You're trying to make somebody else feel bad, deliberately. I mean, it may be happening compulsively, but there's also a deliberate quality to it. We all make other people feel bad inadvertently, just because we don't meet their expectations, or we just have a grumpy bad day and whatever. But that's not what I'm talking about. Titan realm is much more that pointed, you are inferior. Whereas Hell realm is more just like, I am hurting you. Titan realm's more, I want to make myself feel superior. Hell realm's just like, I am in excruciating pain and shame. And here, you have it. At least that'll make me feel like I have some company. And God realm is also a superiority thing. But God realm's more an invulnerability thing. You want to feel invulnerable. So the meanness of God realm isn't me saying anything deliberately mean. It's me denying your pain or your vulnerability, or criticizing your pain or your vulnerability, or being unwilling to listen to that, having a lack of compassion and a lack of empathy because I don't want to feel my vulnerability. So it's a very different flavor. You know, the new agey thing. If you're sick, well, what do you expect? I mean, you didn't eat your sprouts. You eat all this other stuff, you know. You haven't said your aphorisms, whatever. It's a blamey thing, but it's really more about, I just cannot tolerate when someone else displays their impermanence and their vulnerability. So it ends up being mean because we can't tolerate hosting or hearing about anybody else's pain. So they're different. But when we're trying to make someone else feel badly, or we're not having any empathy for people, we're feeling separate from them. The minute we lash out at somebody or denigrate somebody, you know, denigration is kind of the Titan realm, I would say the overarching theme, disparagement, denigration. We're immediately separate. We lose intimacy, and all of the realms represent a loss of intimacy, all of them, in different flavors. So there we are, like Hell Realm, feeling incredibly lonely. I mean, it's definitely the loneliest realm. And then we do stuff that pushes everybody away. It's not a good thing for us, for the people doing it.
You think Hell Realm's lonelier than God Realm?
Yeah, in a sense. God Realm has, you know, it might be full of fixation and fantasy, but there's still some sense of being accompanied by something. There's not that sense of like abandonment, and yeah, there's a big sense of abandonment in Hell Realm. Being abandoned by life, abandoned by God, abandoned. I mean, God Realm would never tolerate that. If a God Realm-y person said, I've been abandoned by God, it's like, what? No, you just broke through the wall of your whole fantasy, right? Mm-hmm. That probably would be maybe a step forward. I don't know.
On the subject of meanness, I was thinking with Trump as a sort of personification of Hell Realm and Titan Realm, that his criticism and his name calling and his accusing have always just blown away any attempt at rational discourse. Mm-hmm. It didn't matter how many facts the person opposing him had. I'm just wondering if you have any observations about why criticism and that kind of aggressiveness have so much power to them.
Well, we live in a shame-based culture, and we're being shamed all the time. And we live in a culture that tells us we have to measure up, or we're of no value. That's the basis of shame. We never have any sense of our inherent value if we're hooked into this pattern. So if someone criticizes you and you have a sense of your innate value, then you can kind of sift through it and think, well, is there anything useful here for me? And if there is, you're kind of like, okay, that's useful, right? And you can throw out the rest. Or if there's nothing useful there, you could be like, I don't know, this doesn't have anything to do with me. But if we're feeling shame and every criticism is a threat to our very, very shaky sense of being okay, then we have to defend ourselves against every criticism. We can't even consider the criticism. We have to suddenly gear up and prove it wrong or dismiss it somehow, because everything just so threatens the shaky edifice of our sense of well-being and being of value. It's why we lie all the time about our histories and our resumes, and we lie online when we post photos that are all make you look like a doll, you know, some sort of porcelain doll. And we're just creating a situation where the inherent fragility is getting constantly enabled. We're just very, very, very fragile. And it's because we live in a shame-based culture, a culture that tells us, unless you measure up, you are not of value and you can be discarded. Measuring up can mean anything, you know. It could mean being white. It could mean being male, it could mean being straight, it could mean owning a house, it could mean whatever. But I think one thing that's clear is that everyone can be discarded. You know, I think what's really clear from the last year, if not before that, if you didn't know before, now we could know that our government doesn't value anybody. And it doesn't matter who you are, you're always up for grabs. There's no one you can be that's actually going to be protected. Not even a child. I think that maybe that will help turn things around eventually if we survive this. If we realize that there's nothing we can do to become valuable to the powers that be, whoever they might be. There's nothing we can do to prove that we're worthy of being taken care of, that our lives are worthy of being protected. If there's nothing we can do, then maybe we'll stop trying and find a different way, right? When you decide that you're in a toxic relationship with someone who is never going to value you, no matter who you are or what you do, in a sense, the only choice is to just pick yourself up and find it for yourself. Find the value for yourself. This is what's called bad stop. Some of you might remember, I haven't talked about this in eons, but I used to get migraines when I was younger. And I always got them when I was overdoing. And when I should have just rested, but I didn't. So I used to call it bad stop. Bad stop's when you get to the end of the line, you didn't listen to all the other messages you got, and now there's nothing to do but do the right thing. So, you know, in the case of my migraines, there was nothing to do but lie down and rest. I was half blind, nauseated, you know. There was no way I could just make a decision to keep going. And as most of you know who know me well, I really like to keep going. I really like to be doing things. It's hard for me to stop doing, not because it's compulsive. I just really, really enjoy being active and participating in the ways that I do. So I had bad stop to tell me to rest. Now we have bad stop written like really large across the whole surface of the planet. There's nobody out there who's going to save us from our bad behavior. We have to do it ourselves. I don't know how bad it has to get, how bad the stop has to get before enough of us recognize that, but I do think that that is what's happening. We're moving toward that point where more and more people are experiencing the reality of our situation as human beings. And are we going to have a world or aren't we? That's our choice. Like, are we going to be in this world? Are we going to have a habitable life or aren't we? This is the Kali Yuga. The Kali Yuga is bad stuff. It's when destruction becomes the only form of wisdom that we can recognize. That's what the Kali Yuga means. It's just how much destruction are we going to need to wise up? Satsang with Shambhavi is produced by Jaya Kula, a nonprofit community offering opportunities to learn and practice in the direct realization traditions of Trika Shaivism and Dzogchen. If you enjoyed listening, please help us keep this podcast and many other teachings open to all by making a monthly or one-time donation. Visit jayakula.org to make a donation and explore more of our offerings.